It's Dr. Pinar here, and I'm going to talk about blood types and genetics. So, as you may know, there are different blood types O, A, B, and AB. And for each of these blood types, you can be Rh negative or Rh positive. So that gives you actually 8 different blood types here. And this is what the different red blood cells look like for each of these blood types. So let's start off with O negative blood. Here we have the red blood cell, and there are no proteins on its surface. Now let's look here at the A negative blood cell. As a type A blood cell, it has A antigens. So it has these little yellow proteins, or at least illustrated here. It has these proteins on the surface of the cell. And for people with blood type A, this is considered completely normal. But if you were to accidentally donate this blood type A to somebody of blood type B, for example, that would be a very big problem because the people with blood type B, their immune system wouldn't recognize these A antigens as normal. They would recognize them as intruders, and their immune system would attack these red blood cells. So that's why you can't donate A type blood to someone with B type blood or vice versa. But let's say you have type AB blood, they have the antigens for both A and B, so their body would recognize either of these antigens, so either the A or the B. So that's why people with type AB positive blood are actually called the universal recipient, because they can receive blood donations from any of these other blood types. Whereas people with O negative blood type are called universal donors because their blood could be donated to people of any other blood type without triggering this immune response. And so we've discussed A and B, and then there's also the Rh factor. So are you positive or negative for the Rh factor, which is fully known as the rhesus D factor? And if you're thinking that this name sounds familiar, it is actually because it comes from the rhesus monkey. So the Rh factor was first discovered in rhesus monkeys. So that's where that name comes from. And separate from type A, B, and O genetics, the genetics for the rhesus factor, it's labeled here with a D because the antigen is called the D antigen. So the protein on the surface of the cell, which is depicted with a black bump in this figure, is called the D antigen. So if you are positive for the Rh factor, you do have that D antigen on the surface of your red blood cells. And let's look at the inheritance of that Rh factor. So here we have a case of two parents who are both positive for the Rh factor and heterozygous. And I can tell this because the mother here has a capital D. So in genotypes, capital letter refers to dominant and a lowercase letter is recessive. So dominant and recessive indicates what you can observe in a person. So here we have someone who is heterozygous. So heterozygous means their alleles are different. In this case, one is capital D, so this is the positive Rh factor, and one is negative. Same here for the father. And in this Punnett square, this shows you the possible outcomes for their children. So they could have 3 children who are also of a positive blood type. So this child, and this child. But they have a 1 in 4 chance, so a 25% chance of having a child with a negative blood type. And that's possible because this lowercase d allele is inherited from the mother. And if the lowercase d allele is inherited from the father, then you can have this child who has homozygous recessive, so they are of a negative blood type. So looking at the names there, hetero means different. So heterozygous, in the case of for example, this child, they have one dominant and one recessive allele, so they have different alleles, so they are heterozygous. In this case, we have homozygous, so homo meaning the same, homozygous dominant, because both of the alleles are dominant. Both of them are capital. So that child is homozygous dominant. And actually, both of the children I've circled here would be of a Rh positive, so a positive blood type. So even though their genotypes are different, their phenotypes would be the same. We'll get into that in a minute. And then here's the last case. This child is also homozygous because their alleles are the same. They're both lowercase d, but they are homozygous recessive. So let's just review that. Heterozygous, the alleles are different. Homozygous dominant, the alleles are the same and they are both dominant. And homozygous recessive, the alleles are the same and they are both recessive. Now let's look into those two terms I mentioned, genotype and phenotype. So genotype refers to the genetic code, so the alleles, whereas phenotype refers to what you can physically observe in the human or other organism. The way to remember this is through the name. So genotype, genetics. Phenotype, spelled with a PH, physical. So let's look at that example of Rh positive. Here we have in the dark red 3 different possibilities where the phenotype is Rh positive, so a positive blood type, but there's actually 2 different genotypes here. So both capital D, and capital D, lowercase d, both of these result in a Rh positive blood type. So this is the phenotype, but this is the genotype. So the same phenotype can actually result from different genotypes. So that means knowing the phenotype, observing a phenotype, doesn't mean we necessarily know what the genotype is. We can predict the genotype, but we can't be sure. Whereas if you do know the genotype, here, for example, in this heterozygous genotype, I can see, yes, it's heterozygous. There is a recessive allele here, but there's also a dominant allele. And because of that, we're going to be seeing that dominant trait, which is the Rh positive factor. And same here, both of these alleles are dominant, so it's also contributing to the person being Rh positive. Now let's go into different blood types here. So these are actually phenotypes that you're seeing here, O, A, B, and AB. And let's determine what the genotype would be. So type O is recessive. So because type O blood is recessive, you must have both alleles be type O. So that's the only way you can get type O blood. So this type O blood as the phenotype arises from a OO genotype. Now, what about type A? Let's look at this case of 2 parents with type A. Their possible offspring can be of type O or of type A. Now, look back here. If we had both parents of type O, the only possible outcome for their child is also type O, because the only alleles that is in this case is this type O. But here, we do have this possibility of having either a child of type A or of type O. So what could that look like? This is possible if, so when we know that someone's blood type is A, that's just the phenotype. We're not sure of the genotype. So someone could be AO or AA. And both of these genotypes would lead to the phenotype of type A blood. So this heterozygous genotype of AO or this homozygous dominant genotype of AA both lead to the phenotype of blood type A. And let's draw out in a Punnett square what that would look like. So if we have two heterozygous parents of type A, let's draw out the different outcomes. So we can have AA, AO as an outcome, again AO as an outcome, and OO. So this is actually showing that there is a 1 out of 4 chance that the offspring of two parents with type AO could have a blood type O child. So that's a 1 out of 4, 25% chance. Whereas the other 3 possibilities are that they are blood type A, but even within that, the children with blood type A could have either this homozygous dominant blood genotype or this heterozygous genotype. And this is the same if you were to have two parents of blood type B. Again, we know their phenotype is B, but we don't know their genotype. Their genotype could be BB or BO. And if their genotype is BB, let's say, let's have one parent of genotype BO and one parent of genotype BB. So these parents both have the same phenotype. They both have the blood type B, but their genotypes are different. So now let's see what the possibilities for their offspring would be. We have BB. We have B and O. Again, we have B and B. And B and O. So actually, we can see here that if one of the parents is homozygous dominant for blood type B, even if the other parent is heterozygous, all of their offspring are going to be blood type B. So this case of having a child with the blood type O, if both parents are blood type B, is only possible if also both the parents are heterozygous. Because to have a blood type of O, you need to receive an O allele from both of the parents, which means both of the parents need to have an O allele to be able to pass that down. So because here we had a parent who is homozygous dominant, neither of their alleles are O. Both of them are B. So all of their children, all possibilities of their children will have one of these B alleles passed down. So actually, let's look at a case where you have the greatest variety in terms of the possible blood type of the child. And that is if you have a parent of blood type B and a parent of blood type A. And these parents also have to be heterozygous. So let's draw that out. So AO, and I will color code these to show you exactly which alleles are going where. So in this case, we are receiving the A allele from one parent and the B allele from the other parent. And this child has blood type AB. In this case, we are receiving the B allele from one parent, but the O allele from the other parent. And this child has type B blood. In this case, we are receiving the A allele from one parent and the O allele from the other parent. So this child has type A blood. And in the last possible case, we are receiving the O allele from both parents. So that child has type O blood. So you have a 25% chance of actually having a child of A, B, O, or AB blood type. So we've discussed here that O is recessive. So that's why if your genotype is AO, your phenotype is still A because A is dominant to O. And similarly with B, B is dominant to O. So the genotype of BO creates the phenotype of B, blood type of B. So what's the case here with AB then? Which one is dominant and which one is recessive there? Actually, both of them are dominant. So both A and B are dominant. So neither is recessive to the other. Because they are both dominant, this is actually a case of co-dominance. So both the A and the B alleles are being expressed. And we can see that in this case, where somebody with blood type AB is expressing both the A and B antigens. So they have both of those proteins on the surface of their cell. So that's codominance. So now to recap, we have genotype and phenotype. Phenotype is what you can physically observe, but it's actually genotype that determines what phenotype is. And multiple different genotypes could lead to the same phenotype. And genotypes can be either heterozygous, so that means the alleles are different, or they can be homozygous, so the alleles are the same. You have two alleles, you receive one from each parent. So if they are the same, if you received an O from the mother and the father, then you're homozygous. And being homozygous, it could be homozygous dominant, so both alleles are dominant and the same, or both alleles are the same, but they are for the recessive alleles. So for example, here, in the case of Rh factor, you have a negative blood type if you have the recessive allele received from both your parents. The lowercase is how we denote recessive, and uppercase is how we denote dominant. So remember to check the names. Genotype is the genetics, and then phenotype is the physical expression, so what you can observe.